Alright, everybody. We have a new TFT patch coming out tomorrow. Today, when I post this video, tomorrow being tomorrow. Um, so let's quickly go through the patch. There's not a lot of big changes, but a lot of small changes that I think are going to add up into some meta changes that we're going to see. Hopefully being the meta becomes even more open than it already is. Alright, so bench overflow has been changed, so anytime you had a full bench and you picked a unit off the carousel, the game would put that unit into play, and there is all sorts of crazy bugs that could happen with that. So now what happens if you have the bench overflow, you get a champion off the carousel, it comes into play. At the end of your planning phase, it's going to automatically sell that champion. There's going to be a marker on it, and you're going to get a warning that tells you this champion's going to get sold if you don't do something. So we don't have a lot of the buggy things that were happening when you had the bench overflow before. This probably is something that they've been working on for a while, but there really wasn't a pressing need to get into. But now they got it in. It's nice. It's helpful. Role changes. So when they did the last patch and they changed the roll percentages, because what had essentially happened was everyone got the 4-1, everyone sold their chosen, they rolled down, got a new chosen, and just made a comp around that chosen. And it was kind of boring. It was too standard a way to play the game. There needs to be more points in which you decide you need to roll on, and 4-1 just became like, well, duh, why wouldn't I do it here? I can get 4-cost champions that are chosen. Yay. So they made the changes there, but the problem that happened with that was if you ended up in... It diversified when you had the roll, along with the life damage changes that were made. So you would often get into situations where you were at 3-2 and you were like, I probably should roll a little. You got the 4-1, I probably should roll a little. Whereas optimally you wanted to get the 5-1 before you rolled to get a stronger board into the late game. But sometimes you ended up on 4-1 and you need the roll, and the rolls were not very good. It basically became impossible to 2-star a 4-cost, which it should be hard, but it was kind of just outright impossible. You would never find 4-costs that would be helpful to you. So they made some minor changes to the level 7 rolldowns, so that way you have a slightly better chance at finding a 4-cost. Hopefully this makes 4-1 rolldowns feel less terrible, because often when I do them, they kind of feel terrible. I'm more praying that I get a 3-cost chosen than I am finding my 4-costs that I need. But moving on, trait changes. So we'll talk more about Divine when we get to Warwick. But in general, Divine is the best composition right now. Like, period. There's like nothing better. So Divine's getting a little bit of a nerf. They probably could have hit it more, but when we get to Warwick, we'll discuss some of the changes they made to Warwick and what I think they should have done with Warwick. But this is fine. I think if they had brought it down to 40, it probably would have been too much. It would have made Divine pretty bad. So I think this is fine. The Elderwood one is a little more interesting. So Elderwood armor and magic resist growth at 3 Elderwood and 6 Elderwood is getting buffed. So Elderwood is kind of weird. You would think Elderwood in the late game is very strong, where combat lasts forever. That's not really true. Often combat does tend to end near the end game, like fairly early. Same thing with the mid game. But in the early game, it's more common for combat to go on forever. But this never translated to Elderwood being good in the early game. In fact, Elderwood's not very good in the early game. It's one of the worst openers that I've ever played. So Elderwood 3 and Elderwood 6 are getting buffs to compensate for the fact that Elderwood 3 doesn't feel like it does anything, and Elderwood 6 kind of feels meh at times. We've had metas where Elderwood 6 is good, and we've had metas where Elderwood 6 is like, well, why are you playing this? So we'll see where this ends up, but my hope is that early game Elderwood, if Elderwood 3, is much better now. Mage. So Mage 6 has been buffed, and that's because Mage 6 is a meme that no one plays. The hope, I assume, is that the combined changes here make Veigar carry better. There's a lot of mages in the game, and very few players play mage builds. There's a handful of builds that play mage 3. Mage 9 is actually kind of Exodia, but is also one of the hardest compositions to build because you need 2 spats. Whereas Mage 6 is something you can do, but never feels strong enough to be noteworthy. So my assumption is that these Elderwood changes combined with these Mage changes may make Elderwood Mage like actually playable and not terrible. So hopefully we see more Veigar. And I think there are other changes that might promote that as to maybe happening. Vanguard. Vanguard armor across the board is getting a buff. Vanguard is probably the worst frontliner in the game. If I had to make my frontliner tier list right now, it would probably be Adept. Then I guess, it's probably not even Brawler after that. So your general front lines for the early game and mid game right now are Brawler and Vanguard. But you almost always drop all of those to go to Adept, because Adept front lines are ridiculous. Or you're running a solo frontliner like Shen. There's actually quite a few solo frontliners if you build it right. But in general, Vanguard in particular is probably the weakest frontline. So hopefully this makes Vanguard 2 and Vanguard 4 a lot better, because they really do pale in comparison to like Brawler 4. Because Brawler 4 is a destroyer in the early game. It's one of the better openers you can play. Champion changes. So, once again, we'll start with Diana. Diana and Lissandra are getting nerfed again. Now, I play at Diamond level right now. My assumption from what I hear from Riot and what a lot of players in the competitive forums say, the competitive players will tell you that there's no reason for this. This build is not that good that it needs a nerf. What I hear from Riot is that this is one of the overperforming compositions, which to me says that players Diamond and below see this comp a lot and see it as very good and free LP. And they might be right. Does that mean it needs this level of nerf? Or, I shouldn't say this level of nerf, because these nerfs are actually just very mild. They're not, going to destroy the composition. But the continuous nerfs kind of makes me think, why is this comp so good in Diamond and below, but kind of meh at Diamond and above? So, this shouldn't change. Moonlight's still going to be a decent composition, but, if you keep making these nerfs, it becomes impossible to win in the end game. Fiora, big buffs to Fiora. I'm actually really happy about this. So, Fiora is often the champion in duelists that I drop out, because she doesn't scale well into the late game. And while that's probably still true with these changes, she scales really well into the mid game now. This is a big damage buff, and this mana change to reduce 1 auto attack on enlightened champions. Ooh. Fiora plus Janna in duelist. Ooh, man, that's a disgusting opener now. Yeah, this is a really good buff. I would expect to see... I would not be surprised if duelist now tries to 3-star Fiora in the early game, along with Yasuo. Or it might even be possible to run Chosen Duelist Fiora. That might be a thing people do. So, I've got my eye on this, because I think these buffs to Fiora are insane. Especially when you itemize her. Blue buff on Fiora is ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of crazy. Maokai is getting very, very big frontline buffs. So, Maokai is probably the worst champion in the game. I have no qualms in saying Maokai is probably the worst champion in the game, period. He's supposed to be a good frontliner, and he doesn't. He kind of just dies. He rarely ever ults if you take him through into the mid game and into the late game. So, he is getting some armor and magic resist buffs. This should make him much better in the early game. Combined with the Elderwood buffs that were given, He should be very, very good in the early game. There's not much else to say. This is going to be a much better champion. Much, much better. Especially in through the mid game. Probably still not going to be great in the late game because Maokai's kind of meh. But in the mid game, he should carry pretty well with your Elderwoods. Wukong, slight damage buff. Doesn't mean too much. He's probably the worst of the Vanguards. Which he probably is supposed to be. Because he has Divine. And doesn't have Warlord the same way Garen does. So he should be better, but this isn't going to bring back Donkey Kong. Don't get your hopes up for that. Tier 2 champions. So Aphelios' attack is getting nerfed, and the reason because of that is because there's a bug that prevented the Hunter trait from proccing on his turrets. So if they did not put this in, he would probably be the best champion in the game. So he needed this damage nerf because they fixed this bug. And rightfully so. This is a good change. Hecarim, 10 mana 10 mana buff to total mana. It's fine. It's not going to change much. Jarvan, the flagman had Ascendeth in the last patch. He was trampling everyone and everything in his sights. To the point that I was somewhat surprised he didn't show up in the B patch. But this is probably the change that needed to be made. Bring him up to 100 mana. Because he's zooming around the battlefield with those blue buffs. And it was kind of becoming very obnoxious. So, good change here. And probably the change I would have done. Silas. Silas is getting a damage buff at 3-star and 4-star. So Silas is one of the less played champions in the game. He's not bad, but he's just less played. I'm interested. I did some like theory crafting a little while ago. I think there probably is a composition for Moonlight 2 with Aphelios and Silas, and it's basically hunters. So you're like Moonlight hunters. I think that comp exists, and I'm probably going to have to give it a try myself at some point. So it's something I'd look out for as an alternate way to play Moonlight if you find Moonlight Aphelios or Moonlight Silas. Just look after it. Especially if you find Aphelios, because Silases are always there for the taking on shops. Whereas Aphelios sometimes gets taken because people are just trying to get more hunter procs. Vi, so they're bringing down the armor reduction on Vi, but lowering the total mana. This is probably a net buff. Probably. Because Vi's total mana is already very low. So they lower that even further. So I suspect this is actually going to be a net buff, but I don't think it's going to do too much. Vi's not like a great game-winning champion, just kind of provides utility. Tier 3, Evelynn. So Evelynn, a lot of people are confused about this particular change. So the explanations that I've been told and I've been seeing is that this is mostly just a nerf to Evelynn 1. Apparently Evelynn 1 is one of the best 3-cost 1-stars in the game. I don't know if that's actually true. I've played Evelynn enough to know that Evelynn's a lot better than people believe. But was she good enough to the point that she demanded a nerf? Don't really know. Yeah, I don't think this changes anything, except for the random people who like think Evelynn is good, like me, and just throw Evelynn in to hold a spot, and she's actually useful. Kalista. So Kalista is getting an attack speed nerf because they fixed a bunch of items on here. So Kalista didn't really work with items before. When I say not really, I mean most items did not work with Kalista because of the way her execute function worked. Just made a mess of the programming. But now, pretty much all of them work, with exception to Jeweled Gauntlet. Jeweled Gauntlet does not work, so do not put Jeweled Gauntlet on Kalista. So the long story short here, Kalista can now be itemized with whatever you want, just not Jeweled Gauntlet. In terms of itemization, I don't think it changes too much how she's itemized. I think most people have found that Hurricane, Death Cap, Rage Blade are probably the best items on her. Unless you're playing Duelist, then you probably don't need Rage Blade, in which case Hodge and Giant Slayer, sort of the Divine. These three in particular, I think, are good items to put on her. I wouldn't recommend IE, though, because her spell can't crit. So all you're getting is the auto attack crits, which I don't think are that useful. Giant Slayer is probably more useful, because Giant Slayer will function with the ult. Lux's chosen stat is changing from mana to spell power. A lot of high tier players complained that Lux's ult was not getting divine bonus damage, so they changed it to spell. When you had a chosen Lux, it was not getting the divine bonus damage because the ult would go off before divine proc. This is what people talk about at the upper tiers. So they changed her from mana to spell power. I honestly think this is a nerf, but that's just low elo me talking. Xin Zhao, another buff to Xin Zhao. Eventually, Xin Zhao will be overpowered and destroy the game someday, but probably not today. Yuumi. Yuumi is getting a health buff. Why? I don't know. I think Yumi's pretty good. She just doesn't have an endgame comp right now. She kind of can wreck people in the mid game. Janna and Yuumi can wreck people in the mid game. If you're not prepared to deal with a Yanni and a Yuumi and a Janna in the mid game, they're gonna trash you. So I'm kind of surprised to see this buff, but whatever. Tier 4, Talon. Talon is no longer a wasteland anymore. He's getting 50 extra health, and his True Strike bonus damage is actually getting buffed to do something. Does this mean Enlighten's back? Probably. It probably means you can play Enlighten now, because previous patch you could not play Enlighten. Enlighten was a trash build. You would never play it. Now it's probably okay. It's probably like upper B tier with this change. Does that mean it's good? No. Just means you can play it. It went from unplayable to playable. That doesn't mean it's good. Warwick. Okay, so Warwick is getting his lifesteal reduced from 50-50 to 40-40 at 1 star and 2 star. So here's the thing with Warwick. Warwick is out of control this patch. If you had a 2-star Warwick and you properly itemized him with either ridiculous offensive items or ridiculous defensive items, he would just never die. He had, between the divine procs and the lifesteal, he was just going to dumpster an entire composition by the time he got... Once that divine proc hit, it was like, we gone. So they definitely need the nerf divine in Warwick. The choices they made to nerf the divine procs bonus from 50 to 45%, and this from 50 to 40%, is probably enough to bring him in line with the rest of the game's compositions, rather than just being outright the best comp in the game. But I think the bigger issue was probably the attack speed bonus they gave to his howls. That thing was crazy. So once Warwick hit a takedown and that attack speed hit, it was just like a wave of death across the field. Because everything that shared a trait with him, Divine, Hunter, Brawler, just wiped the floor. So I probably would have focused more on that, but this change probably brings him more in line with where he needs to be to have a stable metagame, I guess. Tier 5. So, Kayn. Kayn really strong. I ran into a blue Kayn with Gunblade, IS, and blue buff. I thought that game was unwinnable. It was unwinnable. I got smashed. He killed all of my back line in an instant, and I was like, okay, I guess I lose. So his damage is getting nerfed at 1 star and 2 star. It's a very slight nerf. He's still going to be very strong. If you make a Kayn with those items, you're probably still going to win the game. But it's just a minor slap on the wrist. He wasn't as obnoxious as Yone had gotten before the last B patch, but he was really strong. I think more concerning is that Kain and Yone can basically use the exact same items and completely decimate a battlefield. That's a little more worrying to me because that makes more possible linear routes for you to take. When I say that, I mean basically you can play Warlords. If you play Warlords, you build Katarina items, and you get to the end game, you can transition pretty easily into a max 5 cost build where you have nothing but 5 cost champions because all the items you built for Warlords easily transition onto all of those 5 cost champions. Why? Well, because you made a Gunblade for your Katarina, you made a blue buff for your Jarvan, and you made an IS for your Garen. So everything just moves really easily here. Sett got a bug fix, so sometimes Sett would ult things and nothing would happen because for some reason that target vanished off the face of the earth for a moment or became completely untargetable, and that was sad. Sett's ult costs a lot of mana. It'd be nice if it did something. Well, now it does something. So now you at least still get the secondary AoE damage off a Sett ult that doesn't hit anything. Really big buff to Sett, actually. Combined with the Elderwood buffs, I would not be surprised to see the old Elderwood Ashe builds come back into existence, or the Elderwood Brawlers, or Brawler Ashe. I wouldn't be surprised to see those comps come back with Sett. This bug fix really fixes a lot of the issues I think players had with Sett. Item changes. Last Whisper getting a buff. Why? Because they made Vanguards good. Well, I shouldn't say that. They made Vanguards better. Bug fixes. So if you've seen it, you can actually give Galio Zeke's Locket and Chalice buffs. And you can also attempt to Zephyr him, which would always result in a sad failure note. That has been fixed. You can no longer do those things to Galio. He can no longer get those buffs, and you can no longer Zephyr him. Other changes. Oh, Ruinan's Hurricane. So if you ever put a Ruinan's Hurricane on something and put it in the corner, sometimes the Hurricane Bolt would just not shoot. That's because the max range on Hurricane was 7. So occasionally there were things on the other side of the board that your Hurricane Bolt would not shoot at. So that fixed that issue, which is really a buff to Kalista. Kalista, I think, is really the only unit that I think takes advantage of that. Fixed bug on Kalista. That actually doesn't do anything. That's just a numbers game issue. Warwick's Hunter proc with delays. So if you had a high attack speed Warwick, sometimes his Hunter would proc, and that would mess up the timing on all of his auto attacks. So essentially having Hunter and Warwick was a detriment to his DPS. That has been fixed. You can now have Hunter and Warwick in and not have to worry about his DPS getting all wonky. And also his Hunter procs will also trigger on-hit effects now because they weren't for a while there. I blame Shiv. That's it for this patch. I suspect the big change here is Elderwood and Mage. I think Elderwood openers, Elderwood mid-game will be a lot stronger. I think Veigar Mage is back on the menu. Mostly the reason because Elderwood got buffed, you can now play Veigar Mage again, and it will not be completely terrible. I think the top of the meta doesn't really change too much. I think Dusk is still very good. I think Warwick is still very good. But I do think the... how do I want to say this? Enlightened is also back on the menu. You can play it. It probably won't win you lobbies, but you can play it. I do think the Diana Lysandra variant of Moonlight takes a hit. I'm not sure you can actually win games with that comp anymore, unless you're lower elo, gold and below, where a lot of people don't play a lot of the counters to this, like Azir or Taxlow or Dazzler. Jarvan nerf, that hurts Warlord a good bit. Warlord will still be a good opener, totally worthwhile to play. But the big thing to watch in this patch is how do the openers change? Because this Elderwood and this Vanguard change combined with this, well, really the Elderwood and the Vanguard change should change openers a decent bit, because Vanguard was a pretty weak opener. Now Vanguard, not totally a weak-ass opener. You can actually play it. So I'm actually looking forward to this patch. I probably won't get a chance to play it until Saturday, but I hope you all enjoy playing it. Peace out.